Now the topic is the freedom struggle of Tibetan people continues despite suppression by China. Absolutely, for 5 reasons. Number 1, the great 14th Dalai Lama and his vision. Number 2, spirit, solidarity and resilience of Tibetans in Tibet. Number 3, exiled Tibetans, democratization of government exile. Number 4, India and its people, their generosity has helped us survive and sustain and strengthen our movement. Number 5, international community, especially friends of support all over the world, and also particularly in the West, in America and European countries, for supporting us for all these years. So these are the 5 reasons why Tibetan freedom struggle is alive, kicking and strong. Now let me elaborate one by one. As far as, His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet, as we all know, he was born in a poor, farmer's family in Amdo. And from there, he was enthroned at the age of 16 when the invasion of, the Chinese army was imminent. All the adults gave the authority to 16-year-old boy, His Holiness Dalai Lama, to take on the leadership, to deal with the crisis. And he did the best he could to encourage people, inspire Tibetans in Tibet. Went to China in 1954, spent 11 months there, talked to Mao Zedong, talked to Zhou Enlai, the Prime Minister, and Chu Te, to convince them to be more lenient on Tibetans, to introduce reform after consulting and seeking approval of the Tibetan people, which they all agreed. A 17-point agreement was signed on that, which was undersigned under duress, but that was the crux of the understanding. But Communist Party of China turned out to be very conniving. They betrayed all the hopes and the trust of the Tibetan people. Finally, Tibet was invaded, illegally occupied, and brutally suppressed, which forced His Holiness the Dalai Lama and 80,000 Tibetans to come to India. After coming to India, again, 23 or 4 years old Dalai Lama, led Tibetan people, encouraged them in refugee camps. We had nothing. But single-handedly, he visited all the refugee camps. He visited all the schools, rebuilt monasteries. So all the major monasteries destroyed in Tibet was rebuilt in India. Our Buddhist civilization was revived in India, thanks to the vision and leadership of great 14th Dalai Lama. Number 2, the spirit, solidarity and resilience of Tibetans inside Tibet. When Chinese army came, more than 1 million Tibetans perished because of war, persecution, in prison, and of hunger, all kinds of reasons, But the spirit continued, right? Resilience continued. Even today, 6 million Tibetans in Tibet are fighting for the cause. There are protests, silently, publicly, vocally, and we all know fact that 157 or 8 Tibetans have committed self-immolation. They burned themselves. Few of them just last year. That shows how desperate Tibetans are, but also how determined Tibetans are, that they want to say, we will sacrifice ourselves, but we'll fight for a cause. And that our aspirations to see the return of His Holiness Dalai Lama to Tibet and freedom, basic freedom for Tibetans, must be provided by the Chinese government and supported by the international community. So, Tibetan spirit is very strong inside Tibet. Just listen to some of the singers in Tibet. They're singing songs in praise of their identity, how proud of their culture, language, So Tibetans from all walks of life, whether they're nomads, farmers, intellectuals, even the Communist Party members, right? But their heart and their mind is with the Tibetan people and Tibet as a nation. So that's number two, why our freedom struggle continues even today. Number three, exiled Tibetans and the democratization of Tibetan government exile or Tibetan community, right? His Holiness gifted us democracy, exiled Tibetans embraced it. We rebuilt all the major monasteries, as I said, and rebuilt and built rather settlements, schools, monasteries. Now, Tibetan government exile is the most well-run government exile, bar none. There are around 100 million refugees and people in diaspora, but among all of them, the most organized administration in exile is the Central Tibetan Administration. So we all should be very proud of it. It is democratic, right? And it's functioning and it delivers. We run our own schools, we run our own hospitals, we run our own bank, we run our own semi-embassies all over the world. And then, the Tibetan communities and the organizations all over the world are well connected and integrated very, very well. So exiled Tibetans have played major role, and now the younger generation who are getting better education, better exposure will provide far, far, far better leadership for the Tibetan freedom movement. So that's number three. Number four is India and its people. Without the generosity of India and its people and its great leader in 1950s, 60s, who provided us shelter and made us not just survive, but sustain and strengthen. So that's the reason why we are strong today. Now, lately, even in India, there is a realization that, perhaps PRC, especially Communist Party of China, may not be trusted because of the repeated incursions in the border area, hostile actions from Doklam in 2015 in Sikkim, Bhutan and area, and Galwan Valley in May, June of 2020 in Ladakh, and recently in Arunachal Pradesh, just a few months ago, the incursions and the fist fights between Indian and Chinese troops, which Indian troops pushed them back, clearly indicate that the PLA soldiers are a bit hostile and aggressive towards Indian side, and the sovereignty of India is under challenge. Now, why I say this is growing realization, because historically, there was never a land border between India and China. It was always a border between India and Tibet. 3,000 miles long border, 3,000 plus. It was with India and Tibet. In fact, when Tibet was invaded, the finance ministry of Tibet, Shagaba, wrote Indian Prime Minister saying, help us. If you help us now, it will help you too. Because presently we have barely 80 or so soldiers guarding 3,000 mile long border, right? If you don't help us now, India will pay a heavy price, and it has become a reality. Now, if you look at the border, not 80, not 8,000, not 80,000, but hundreds of thousands of Indian soldiers in this cold weather are guarding the border areas of India because the Chinese troops have come to the other side. So India has paid the heaviest price. And also, this remains a major challenge because, in Asia, as Asia prospers, as Asia becomes rich and powerful, the tensions and conflicts are bound to happen. And Indo-China conflict is much talked about, but actually historically there was no Indo-China border. It was always between India and Tibet. So Tibet is the reason, Tibet is the buffer zone, Tibet is the land which is the source cause or the reason for the conflict if it happens in the future. So without understanding the Tibet issue, you will never understand Indo-China land border issue. So very important. And also Tibet is a source of major rivers of Asia, right? You just name it. It's Philippines in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and in the major rivers of Southeast Asia, Mekong, Irrawaddy, Salween, all flow from Tibet. hundreds of millions of people in Southeast Asia are dependent on these rivers. And the source of these rivers is Tibet. Brahmaputra for northeast of India and Bangladesh, again, originates in Tibet. Satluj River and Indus River, which is a lifeline both for India, particularly Kashmir area, and Pakistan, both flow from Tibet. Even for China, right? The Yangtze River and Yellow River both originate in Tibet. And even the Chinese environmentalists are saying, we must protect the Tibetan plateau for the sake of Chinese people. That is the source of our water. 1.4 billion people in Asia are dependent on water flowing from Tibet. So even the Chinese environmentalists are coming out and saying, we must declare Tibet as a national reserve, or a national park, to protect it for our own sake. And Tibet is a source of, many minerals. You just name it: uranium, gold, copper, lithium. Obviously, we all know Xinjiang has iron and petrol, and Inner Mongolia has, 90% of rare earth of China comes from Inner Mongolia, so on and so forth. So very important. And now India is realizing, in fact, the whole of Asia is realizing how important Tibet is. So that's the reason number 4. Number 5 is international community. Friends of Tibet all over the world, right? Buddhist centers all over the world. They've been the foot soldiers who carried the Tibetan struggle, carried our flag in the streets and the corners of various capitals and various cities and towns and villages, that kept the Tibetan freedom struggle alive for all these years, for which we are very grateful. And particularly in the Western countries, right? America being in the forefront, European countries, also recently in Japan. Now Japan has the largest parliamentary support group in the whole world, right? Recently they formed a coalition caucus of Tibetan, Mongolian, and Uyghur people of human rights violation, and there is, caucus where more than 100 Japanese parliamentarians have joined and be part of it, and they passed resolution also in the parliament condemning human rights violations of Uyghur Tibetans and Mongolians. So these are all thanks to the support of international community why Tibetan cause is still alive. And as far as United States is concerned, in 2020 they passed Tibetan Policy Support Act 2020. Now it's a law in the US to support Tibet. And then there are several resolutions have been passed in the Czech Republic and few European countries as well. So international community have played vital role in supporting the cause of Tibet. So number 1, His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet. Number 2, Tibetans inside Tibet, 6 million of them, solid, strong. Number 3, exiled Tibetans. Number 4, India and Indian people. Number 5, international community and international governments. These 5 fingers united as one have sustained the Tibetan freedom struggle, for which we are very, very grateful. And we urge people in Philippines and Southeast Asia, revive that same spirit for justice which you led in 1959, 61, 65 at the United Nations, at the UN General Assembly, where Malaysia, Thailand, and Philippines were in the forefront, supporting the cause of Tibet. Please continue to have this kind of debate and be with us till basic freedom of Tibetan people is realized and His Holiness Dalai Lama return to Tibet. Till then, I would like to again thank Center for Southeast Asian Studies for organizing this conference and all the participants. And you have very impressive list of speakers. And I have just summarized 5 key points as to why Tibetan freedom struggle continues despite suppression by China. And the impressive speakers will elaborate on these 5 points and many other comprehensive issues to make this conference a very successful informative educational event. Thank you very much. 다시 들렉 투지체.